Welcome, everyone. While the room fills out, I just want to thank everyone for coming and thank all of our speakers that we have with us today. It's very exciting. I am Caitlin Urso. I work for the Colorado Department of Public Health and Environment. I have helped plan this event for the last 2 years. This is the third year that I'm helping with. It's a little bit different this year with it being a total virtual conference, but we've all faced a lot of changes in our life, and I'm proud to say that this group has stepped up and adapted to the virtual world. And so I'm really excited to continue this event with all of you. The Cannabis Sustainability Symposium event is actually in its 5th year this year, which is very exciting. We have over 130 speakers, 45 panels. This year is important as ever. Sustainability is really important for the evolving cannabis industry and really presents an opportunity for the industry to become a leader in best management practices that have a positive impact for economic, environmental, and community value. Those are the 3 aspects when we talk about sustainability. Sustainability is more critical now than ever, and we are grateful for the thought leadership that's going to be presenting today. I'm excited to welcome our moderator, Rebecca Spence. So take it away, Rebecca.
Awesome. Hi, everyone. I'm Rebecca Spence. I am an associate attorney right now at the Rodman Law Group, and we do business law with a focus on cannabis, CBD, and hemp. In my past life, I helped to start a nonprofit that did sustainability reports for different kinds of businesses. Some of my work was presented to the United Nations and the European Union. And so I'm really happy to just find a merging of the 2 worlds here today. And we have some amazing panelists that will be discussing best practices of energy, waste, water, and design. And so as more states start to move toward legalization, the industry faces growing pressure to become more sustainable. With stringent regulations and operational codes looming over daily operations, sustainability can sometimes be difficult to achieve or move toward. So today we're just going to explore some sustainable solutions that cannabis companies and the like can adopt going forward. We'll start with Kyle Elizabeth. He is the Director of Operations and Business at Silver Bullet Water Treatment. He's been involved with several domestic and international ventures focused on industrial, municipal, and agricultural applications, and his personal time equally supports conservation and environmental sustainability efforts related to river and watershed management. And I'll let him give you a little bit more info and give us a rundown of his topics that he will be discussing. Take it away, Kyle.
All right, thanks, Rebecca. Appreciate the intro. Yeah, my name's Kyle Elizabeth. I'll talk a little bit about myself and the company I represent. And then my goal was to talk about water management and water treatment as it relates to a new facility design that some of you guys may be thinking of. And I'm going to share a couple slides with you guys and a couple brief takeaways that I think will help you guys out and hopefully you guys can refer back to with this recorded webinar. So I'm going to share my screen, which I can't. Okay, that's saying that that's disabled.
Okay. Oh, it says you can now. Try one more time.
Excellent, thank you. So, everybody can see that. Just that intro slide right there with my name. And Silver Bullet Water Treatment is the company I represent. We're based out of Golden, Colorado. Small water treatment company. We've been around for about a decade and a half. Before that, I worked on international water management, mainly focused on agriculture. And reuse applications for agriculture. So we take city water or some other waste stream, we clean it up and we try and reuse it for agricultural purposes. My time with Silver Bullet, I'm now in charge of our horticulture division. It's our youngest but fastest growing division. We actually got started at Silver Bullet treating and conditioning water for large ag like livestock drinking water. and data centers, essentially cooling towers and condensate. And so we merged those two, and we found a lot of our applications and our approach is very well suited for controlled environment ag, and in particular cannabis. So we focus on those markets. We're a custom design engineering firm. We have scalable treatment solutions and water management programs for a number of different types of grows and different sizes. And I think we take a lot of pride in installation, commissioning, and service. As you guys build up your new facilities, you're gonna see that I think there's a lot of value add in the commissioning and the service portion of it. And I'm gonna talk a little bit about it here today. And then on the back end, complementing that service, we do a lot of analytical services and R&D work for our customers. We have 3 labs in-house, and that gives us the ability to test water, test plant tissue, test nutrient formulas, helping us to design the right treatment equipment, keep growers in compliance, and just ensure things are running smoothly. So why water management is important in controlled environment ag and in cannabis cultivation. Water as a whole should be a really small subset of your CapEx and your OpEx, but it's the critical lifeline of transporting nutrients and growing plants. You can see from those 2 pictures, a good water management program and good water quality can result in optimal plant production. Whereas if something goes wrong with your water quality or your water plan, it can result in a bad harvest. And that's ultimately, you know, your bottom line right there. It also keeps you in compliance. You can be a good environmental steward by reclaiming a lot of water. There's new regulations in different states that require you to reclaim or meet certain discharge limits. So it's impactful. It's impactful to your operational management. And if you get it right when you're designing those facilities, you can lay out a good plan that's going to save you money and time. So a couple takeaways, and then I'm going to pass this on. So there's 4 on this slide, and there's 4 on the next one. Hopefully everybody can write these down and kind of remember them. First, I'd identify my cultivation method. Why this is important is because it directly impacts how you're going to be growing. You know, some growers are very used to a certain type of method, whether it's top feed drip on cocoa or recirculating hydroponics. But get an idea of how you want to grow, how much water that's going to take, and have a plan B. Because sometimes that one cultivation method might not fit into the overall facility design or requirements based on the state or based on the infrastructure that you're going to be using. Next, super easy, get a water analysis done, okay? Go to a lab, understand what's in the water, what you're starting with, and what you need to treat it. Understand local regulations. Different states, different townships, different regions are all different. What do you need to do to treat? What do you need to do to discharge? What do you need to reclaim? Get input from industry experts. There's a lot of insight as to how these water rooms and mechanical rooms should be laid out, how water should be distributed and reclaimed that can provide efficiencies in your operation. And the last 4, determine your facility design. Now that you understand how to grow, what the regulations are, and how that's going to kind of be laid out, figure out if you want below ground or above ground storage tanks, if you want piping under the foundation, how things are going to be collected and reclaimed into a water room. That's all value add that those industry experts are going to give to your facility as you grow that out. CapEx and OpEx, again, small portion of your overall capital budget, but laying it out and understanding what it's going to take to keep the water treatment equipment and the water distribution infrastructure maintained and operating is critical to your guys' success. Establish a team that can work together. I can't stress this enough. You're going to have your permit and your license, and you're going to go into the construction phase, and you want your engineers, your architects, your vendors, and your growers all on the same page. Okay, you want to understand how it's laid out, how things are integrating, and a good process flow for your facility. And that's the next portion. You know, develop an operating plan. Now that you have that, understand how your growers know how to use that equipment, and you have an audit to keep it running smoothly, and you have a service plan, and you use data. Data is king in this industry. Leverage it the best you can. So I'm going to turn it back over to Rebecca and have somebody else talk.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Kyle. That was really interesting to learn about. I'm sure we'll learn a little bit more in the question portion of the panel. And I did just want to say that for all attendees, you can feel free to ask questions in the Q&A area of Zoom whenever you want, and I'll either pick those out, you know, while they're talking, try to slot it in there if it feels like it's supposed to fit in their conversation, or I'll save it for later. Yeah, all right, we'll move on to Nick. This is Nick Collins. He's an associate director at ERS. He's a professional engineer licensed in Maine. His areas of expertise include monitoring and verification of energy efficiency projects and the analysis of energy efficiency and demand limiting measures. And I'll let him kind of expand on that and give his little presentation as well. Nick, you're on mute there.
Can you hear me now?
We can, thank you.
All right. So I'm going to talk today about energy and energy efficiency opportunities in cultivation facilities. I'm going to touch on a number of sort of topics that I think are like good fodder for conversation as we go here. So talk a little bit about the role of equipment, the cultivator, and the utility itself as it relates to both energy consumption and CO2 emissions. So, you know, there's a question there, how do we define sustainability? Are we just looking at energy consumption? Are we looking at the associated emissions associated with that? So a little bit about the company I work for, Energy and Resource Solutions. It's an energy engineering consulting company, been around for over 25 years now. Mostly engineers and analysts. We're headquartered in Massachusetts, but we've got offices really scattered around the country. Most of our work is with utilities and program administrators, either designing, implementing, or evaluating energy efficiency programs for those utilities. For the past 12 years, I have been working on the custom program for Efficiency Maine and managing that program for the past several years. Our cannabis experience. So, you know, sort of our real strength as an engineering firm is measurement and verification. So going into commercial industrial facilities and understanding the flow of energy through the facilities and identifying and quantifying energy efficiency opportunities. So it was about 6 years ago, through our work actually with Efficiency Maine, we went and did a scoping audit at a large cannabis facility, and it's fairly eye-opening in terms of what I expected it to be like and what it was. And we recognized there was a lot of opportunity within this industry to sort of raise the bar in terms of the performance and to try to start filling in a lot of the substantial data gaps that still exist when it comes to energy and efficiency in these facilities. So over the past 6 years, these are some of the highlights of the work that we've done in the cannabis sector. We work with the utilities in Massachusetts as technical advisors. So when facilities are looking for incentives for lighting, HVAC, whatever, we perform that assessment in terms of what's the energy use, what are the savings. We've authored a few studies, one for Canada, one in Massachusetts. The one for Efficiency One was really on horticultural lighting. The Massachusetts study was on really standard practice for all indoor cannabis cultivation, specific to Massachusetts, as they have some interesting regulations there. We produced engineering calculations for the Title 24 code review that's going on right now. Fairly recently, we wrapped up the Boulder County Cultivators Energy Assessments, which was a great project we really enjoyed. We're just kicking off a study in Illinois for the utilities there, and we've done a bunch of direct work with facilities in Maine, Mass, and Colorado. So we've been pretty busy over the past 6 years in the cannabis space, and I've been really fortunate to work on some of these projects that we have here. So like I said, this is going to be a little bit of a scatter shot because there's a couple of interesting topics, all mostly related, that I just want to throw out there. The way that I look at efficiency in a cultivation facility is that there's like 3 elements to it. You have the limits of the facility, the limits of the cultivator, and the limits of the plant itself. And back in the day, I used to teach race car driving, rally car driving. We would say that the car has the limits, the driver has limits, and the road has limits. You can exceed one of those 3 probably at any time, but if you exceed more than one at a time, you're going off. You can't outperform the facility using cultivars that are difficult to cultivate. Even if you're the best cultivator in the world, you're going to have challenges here. So each of these elements plays a role in the efficiency and the productivity of the facility. So let's look a little bit about what are some of those opportunities or some of those energy end uses associated with those. So when it comes to the facility itself, where should we even focus our efforts? There's a lot of different end uses in cultivation facilities. This is fairly representative of indoor cultivation for an all-electric facility, which would be on the right here, and a facility that has electric and natural gas serving the facility. We can see right away there's a big chunk of energy use dedicated to lighting. These facilities are on HID, or high pressure sodium, more specifically for flowering. So you get a sense that, okay, lighting is a huge component of overall energy use. That's something that we need to address. How do we address lighting? The big opportunity from a technology standpoint clearly is LEDs. When we look at the HVAC side, there's still a lot of energy use happening there. But when you start looking at energy costs, it gets a little bit more complicated. In most areas, the cost for electricity exceeds that of natural gas. And so even though you're using quite a bit of fossil fuels, in this case, the cost of that energy is quite a bit less to that operator. Nonetheless, we see there's a lot of opportunity on the HVAC side. So simply, what do those basic opportunities look like? LED fixtures, still a bit controversial, I suppose, but making substantial inroads. Places like Massachusetts, likely Illinois, it's going to be really difficult to meet the requirements, possibly California in a few years, of those jurisdictions without LED fixtures. So generally speaking, you want to look for these high efficacy fixtures, a lot of PPFD delivered to the plant, the warranty, the safety requirements. The Design Lights Consortium website is an excellent resource for LED fixtures where you can at least get some independent test data on the performance of those fixtures. On the HVAC side, there are a lot of different system types that can serve these facilities well. What's important is to understand the challenges of these facilities related to HVAC. Your kind of classic indoor cultivation facility is sealed. They're trying to introduce as little outdoor air as possible, if not no outdoor air. So all of the sensible heat loads from the lighting, all of the latent loads from the transpiration of the plant, those all have to be dealt with through the mechanical system. Because of those unusual loads, you have essentially a lot of moisture in the air. You have sensible heat ratios that are very low compared to the equipment that is sort of typical commercial cooling equipment. There's some numbers here for reference in these slides, and you can just see, okay, those numbers don't align. And even if you don't know what sensible heat ratios are, those numbers ideally would match. So trying to serve cultivation facilities with standard commercial cooling equipment is a bad starting point. They're not designed for these facility types. So try to match the performance of your equipment with the sensible heat ratios of your space, right? So lower sensible heat ratios, more capacity to remove moisture from the air, or even better, variable sensible heat ratios, where they can dial in essentially the conditions of the air delivered to the space. So you can maintain those set points and even change your set points throughout the cycle of the plant during lights on, lights off photo periods, etc. Because of the amount of sensible heat, the heat given off by the lights, even LED fixtures give off a lot of heat. That has to be removed from the space. However, typical HVAC dehumidification processes require heat to complete the dehumidification process. So there's almost always an opportunity to recover some of the heat that you're removing primarily from flower rooms and reintroduce that into the HVAC cycle in the form of heat, reheat for dehumidification, or even domestic hot water. HVAC retrofits, and again, a little bit of a scatter shot, but we've looked at a lot of facilities at this point that are existing operating facilities, do pretty careful measurements of the facilities to understand where the energy is going, what the end uses are, and it's fairly uncommon in our experience so far that we find HVAC retrofits that have tolerable paybacks. Because the HVAC is a smaller component of the overall energy cost, even pretty substantial savings, 20 to 30%, may not produce favorable paybacks on energy savings alone. However, we do see a lot of facilities that are limited in terms of the production they can get out of that footprint because of a lack of cooling performance or cooling capacity. Fixing that, allowing the facility to increase production, suddenly those HVAC retrofits can have very, very quick paybacks. What about the cultivator? What role does the cultivator play? So I'm going to give an example. These are two real facilities that we've got over a year's worth of data on the performance of these facilities. And this is where the title of my slides came from, A Tale of Two Facilities. So these two facilities have the same lighting technology, same in situ PPFD that we measured. They both flower in tiers, same basic HVAC technology. I say the same target temperature and RH more or less because like many of the facilities that we work in, they may have a temperature and relative humidity target, but they can't really hit it all the time. So these folks were more or less operating in the same environmental conditions, and they were in the same climate zone. So on paper, you look at these facilities and you say, these are fairly equal, fairly equivalent situations in which to cultivate, or facilities in which to cultivate. What were the results of those two facilities? We've got a bunch of metrics here on the left, so we're kind of looking at this performance through a few different lenses. First one's grams per kWh. How many grams did they produce annually per kWh they consumed? First facility, 0.58, second, 0.94. The second facility, 38% more productive per unit of electricity. The next line is that same comparison, but all fuels. So electricity as well as any fuel consumption. Again, second facility, substantially better. We look at now the intensity, energy intensity per flowering square foot, both kWh and MMBTU. And we can see that facility 2 is actually, we'll call it worse, but they're more intense per square foot of flowering canopy. Then we get down to the last metric, or the second to last metric, excuse me, grams per flowering square feet. And this is really dramatic. The second facility is producing, double essentially what the first facility is in terms of that flowering canopy space that they have. And that all translates to substantially less emissions per gram produced. So we have, again, two facilities that on paper are all but identical, but really substantial performance differences as it relates to both energy, productivity, and emissions metrics. And these facilities, this came down to the cultivator. It was how successful they were in growing their cultivars within those footprints. Which brings us to the last question, the cultivar itself. And it's widely understood that different strains, different cultivars have different needs. They're going to have different flowering periods. They're going to have different preferences for the environmental conditions. Some produce weightier plants. There's more quantity as well as different quality. And this is a really interesting element to me of the efficiency and productivity of these facilities, though to my knowledge, it's not something that's really been widely studied. I think a lot of people sort of understand intuitively that there's a connection here, but to me, this is a really interesting area for future study. And then my last bit here is the role of the utility service. So this really relates to the emissions of the facility, not so much the energy use. So every utility has a different mix of sources from which they generate that electricity that is sent to customers. And that mix varies quite a bit region to region and really impacts the associated CO2 emission equivalent produced per unit of energy delivered. Just as an example, if we take a facility, and we wrote a little article about this recently in Cannabis Business Times, there's a little bit more detail you can check out there. But you take a facility that has the same exact consumption of electricity and natural gas. You cite that facility in Massachusetts versus citing that facility in Colorado. And again, no other differences. The energy use is exactly the same. The Massachusetts facility will have about 50% less associated emissions, simply because Massachusetts has a large amount of renewables in the mix of generation assets, and Colorado has a really high mix because there's a lot of high carbon intensity because there's a lot of coal in the mix. So the location of these facilities relative to the utility serving them really does play a big role ultimately in an individual facility's emissions. And that wraps up my slides and some food for thought.
Thanks, Nick. And we had a quick question from the audience. Valerie asked if the horticultural lighting study from Efficiency One was publicly available.
I don't know that it's like online publicly available, but it is certainly if you reach out to Efficiency One, they'll provide it. I know that they've shared it with a lot of utilities and programs around the country. So it's out there, but I don't know that it is like posted on their website. But we can certainly facilitate getting a copy of that.
Awesome, thank you. And next we have Brandon Ray. He is the Senior Compliance Officer and Sustainability Program Coordinator at Native Roots Cannabis Co. And he's participated in numerous committees, panels, symposiums with great minds in the world of cannabis and sustainability. And so some of this experience includes being an active member of the Denver Cannabis Sustainability Work Group, as well as the Marijuana Enforcement Division Sustainability and Science Plus Policy Work Group. So Brandon also chairs Native Roots Internal Sustainability Committee. We'll pass it over to you, Brandon.
Awesome, thanks for that intro, Rebecca. And great content, by the way, Nick and Kyle. Really interesting stuff. Sometimes it's great to see those details there, some numbers associated with that, really kind of round that out a little bit more. So I definitely appreciate that. As Rebecca said, my name is Brandon Ray. I'm Senior Compliance Officer and Sustainability Program Coordinator here at Native Roots Cannabis Co. We are one of the largest cannabis companies in Colorado and the world. We have 20 retail locations here in Colorado. We're also a vertically integrated company, so we grow, have a MIP facility to extract and make products there. And then we also have a few retail licenses up in Canada, which is very exciting. So I'm sure as you've heard throughout the week, the kind of 3 pillars of sustainability, but as a quick reminder, that's kind of the social, environmental, economic, or people, planet, profit, which I like a little bit better because of the alliteration. And we keep that in mind at Native Roots to kind of approach sustainability with that full scope in mind. Social, that covers things like community engagement, volunteering, social equity. We definitely have a very robust community engagement program. We make sure to get all our locations to volunteer regularly. And I think that's something that may not be the obvious stuff that you think of when you think of sustainability, but it's very important to kind of include that in your overall scope. The environmental part, that is probably more of the stuff you're talking about, and stuff that Nick and Kyle touched on when it comes to water conservation, energy, HVACs, and waste, which is a big thing that I'll touch on in more detail. And then economic, in addition to keeping the doors open and making sure you're staying open in this company, there's also things involving employment, economic development, collaborating with other businesses that we like to focus on there. An example of that is Focus Points, which is an organization that helps kind of people connect their jobs in their communities so you can live and work in the same vicinity, which helps from a sustainability perspective as far as travel, and also just opens up job opportunities for those that might be a little more disadvantaged and have limited travel opportunities. And on the social front too, one specific example is we've worked with the Turning Over a New Leaf program to expunge marijuana convictions here in Denver and Boulder. So that's a great program that I'm big fan of. And also the Color of Cannabis is an organization we started partnering with recently that our public affairs runs point on that. So I won't dive into details, but I'm a big fan of them. So I always like to give a quick shout out. Then a few things that Rebecca kind of touched on in the intro. Go back a slide. We do participate in the Denver Cannabis Sustainability Work Group, this Cannabis Sustainability Symposium we've been on for many years. And we also work on many of the MED rulemaking groups and try to kind of bring a sustainability focus there. As Rebecca said, we do have an internal committee that we use basically to kind of collaborate, bring different departments together, talk through ideas and projects and make sure we're, brainstorming, come up with new things. It's an obviously ever evolving idea of sustainability, especially in our industry that's still emerging. So we always like to bring in new ideas and collaborate as much as we can, both within our organization and around. And so with those efforts and some other stuff that I'll touch on, we were honored to receive 2 sustainability awards in 2019 from the Cannabis Sustainability Symposium as well as MJ BizCon. And then this year we actually got a Commuter of the Year award. Technically has my name on it, but it's really a Native Roots award. Me biking around the city doesn't do much if other people aren't involved in it. And that's through the Denver Regional Council of Governments. And I'll actually segue into my next slide on that one. And the reason I bring this up is it's something that's not specific to cannabis or even production, but it's just an example of how you can kind of think outside the box and bring in some new ideas to develop more of a sustainable culture in your organization overall. And this is basically a commuting program we have to encourage our employees to carpool, bike, transit, scoot, walk, basically anything but drive by yourself or taking a solo Lyft, Uber, taxi. And we do that by offering incentives and resources at certain locations in collaboration with some local transportation management associations. And if there's just some data on here to kind of look at that, one of the perks we have for some locations is a gift card each month if you hit so many commutes, and we're creeping up on $10,000 in gift cards, which is a nice little perk each month. I certainly like getting that each month. And then, a quick little breakdown of how people are doing that commuting. A lot of carpooling, transit, another really popular one, and then a decent amount of biking, although that tends to drop off a little bit in the winter months. And as you can see, we're by far the top-ranked company in Colorado. And then the last thing I'll mention there is if any other people from Native Roots are on the call, make sure you log your trips for Go-Tober competition this month. The next thing kind of fits more in the wheelhouse of what we're talking about here. Soil and fibrous waste, these are 2 major outputs of indoor cannabis cultivation. And soil I'm kind of using as a placeholder for any grow medium. And fibrous materials defined here as stalk stems and root balls, and then fan leaves. Not really a fibrous material, but it's another waste product that has some alternative uses that you want to make sure it's not just going to the landfill. As far as options, a couple things we at Native Roots have looked into and tried. We use Coco Coir, and we earlier this year did a pilot program to donate and repurpose some of that grow medium with local farmers organizations, community gardens, and things like that. Unfortunately, COVID, that was one of the casualties of kind of ramping that up to a bigger degree this year, but we are looking to kind of expand on that and use some of those lessons learned for next year. And then fibrous products, we do have an R&D partnership with a processor in place. Again, COVID wasn't the best thing to happen for helping that ramp up. We're looking at other options in the marketplace and keep on pulling on that thread and finding great uses for material that has a lot of great purposes on the back end. And on the topic of soil and fibrous waste, I know a topic that's come up a lot throughout the week has been kind of the balance between business initiatives and restrictions and policy considerations. So I wanted to kind of point out a couple of things there specific to Colorado and their marijuana enforcement division rule changes. They're great about engaging with businesses on this, and they actually had a work group specific to sustainability, science, and policy this year that I was fortunate enough to be on. And they, these aren't finalized yet, but it's looking like these will go into the final rules where basically they made an exception to the 50-50 mixing requirement, which is designed to make the material unusable and unrecognizable, but made an exception for stalk stems, fan leaves, and root balls if used for sustainable means. And those means are defined as composting, anaerobic digestion, pyrolyzing into biochar, and biomass gasification. So as those talks of what constraints are, kind of keeping sustainability from progressing, I think it's worth giving props to the MED here in Colorado for being a great group to work with. Jim Barak, Dominique Mendiola, Shannon Gray, Kyle Lambert, a bunch of other people I'm not thinking of off the top of my head. They're great people to work with. I don't want to go into a whole Oscar speech naming off people, but I think it's important to put names to those efforts because this stuff doesn't just happen on its own. If you don't have great people to collaborate with in the government, it makes it a lot more difficult to get these things to happen. And also, I would say, Ben's probably mentioned it throughout the week, and you've heard him, the sustainability work group here in Denver, a lot of the conversations and work from those meetings has gone right into these rules. I certainly paraphrased, if not blatantly, just copied some of the conversations there when I was on the work group. So really appreciate that from Ben and everybody involved. I've definitely learned a lot from my years on that. The next thing, container collection, reuse, and recycling. Another frequent criticism of the cannabis industry in Colorado and abroad is just the amount of packaging waste involved. I know I hate it when I'm walking around Denver and I see doob tubes and things like that on the streets. It just bugs me that our industry is not a little bit more green in that respect, which obviously is not unique to us, but I think as a newer emerging industry, we have a lot of opportunities there. Earlier this year on 1/1, they actually explicitly allowed dispensaries to start collecting consumer containers at dispensaries to encourage them to do collection, reuse, recycling programs. As far as why that's important, a lot of people think, well, I can just throw that into my recycling at home and that should be fine. If you look here and just think of like a little 1/8 dram or pre-roll tube in there, that's going to be pretty hard to find. I didn't actually put one in there, so don't actually look for it, but you get the idea. It's probably not going to go through there. From talking to a lot of waste handlers, those essentially aren't getting recycled. They're just going to the landfill. So it's one of those things where it looks like you're doing something good, but on the back end, it might not actually be what you think, which can be a little frustrating, but it's something that I think have started to recognize in the industry and have started to try to address in different ways. And one thing to keep in mind in there is the reduce, reuse, recycle. That is a hierarchy. So best case scenario is to reduce the waste. Next is to reuse it. Recycle is basically the last thing before sending it to landfill, which is obviously the worst scenario there. We're looking at more direct reuse and recycling options, basically kind of having a more kind of multi-stream approach to it to make sure that material actually gets recycled, perhaps even have some reuse options there. And when I say we there, I mean Native Roots and also the general industry of cannabis in Colorado, as well as some of the regulators. I know the city of Denver was trying to kind of do a pilot program last year. It might kind of get picked up at some point, but again, with the tax considerations and limited budgets, there's only so much they can really do there, and some of that is kind of falling on the industry. Incentives and stuff like that are nice, but something we can't always rely on. And then again, on that note, I want to point out a couple things that were in the 2021 rule changes for sustainability. Not only are we allowed to collect at dispensaries, they plan to expand that to all business types to allow more options for collecting, and also expanding the collection areas to not just the limited access areas, so like a bud room or something like that, where you're limited on space, especially now where you have limited capacity for COVID restrictions. If you can have something more in a lobby, a little more accessible, that I think is an important factor to allow people to do. There's also some verbiage added around good working order for reusing cannabis containers to allow and encourage reuse programs, not just recycling. Like I said, that's the better hierarchy in that kind of ranking there. So still a little bit of ambiguity and a lot of kind of logistics to figure out. It's definitely not an easy flip of a switch. This is kind of one of the white whales I've been kind of looking at, since getting more into the sustainability realm. But I think it's worth looking at, and it's been great to see at least the changes in the rules to allow more kind of innovation in that realm. And that's pretty much a quick rundown. We want to leave a lot of time for questions here. So if that sparked any ideas, obviously we'll dive into any of those. If you have any thoughts or things you want to send my way, you can email just sustainability@nativerootsdispensary.com, and that'll come directly to me. So look forward to any questions you might have.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks so much, Brandon, and to all of our panelists for your presentations. We did have a quick question asking if there are companies that have emerged to create secondary products from cannabis-generated waste. That you know of off the top of your head.
I don't know any off the top of my head. I do know there are companies that are looking into the reuse option of collecting containers, cleaning, sanitizing, and reusing those. One that we have here in Colorado is Green for Green. I've kind of heard of others, but not as familiar with them. But I know that is something that people are looking into. And I imagine a more cannabis-specific collection and recycling program is probably out there. But I think best case scenario, if we can kind of introduce that into the normal recycling stream, that would be ideal. I think, throughout the week, there's big concerns raised and challenges with the kind of single stream recycling approach and how that doesn't work quite as well as some of the multi-stream, even though multi-stream requires a little bit more effort on the consumer side and kind of public knowledge. I think getting a system like that that just integrates cannabis containers effectively is probably the easiest approach.
Right, and we did have another question about specifically about lithium ion batteries for vapes and things like that. I'd imagine your answer might be pretty similar there.
Yeah, and vapes are a tough one. The actual pens have a little bit more of an option because they're electronic, just pure electronics. You can have those recycled, just like most electronic devices. Since they're so small and compact, there's probably a little bit more kind of effort involved in actually making it recycled. The cartridges are kind of tough because it's such a variety of material. You have metal, you have plastic, you have residue in there. So those, there's not really a great example that I've seen. I know from talking with other vape companies, it's something they're looking into. We do some vape manufacturing as well, so it's something we've kind of looked at. But just kind of the cost there is really the challenge. As far as reuse, obviously it'd be tough to collect those, clean them out, refill them, make that like economically viable. And again, recycling, they're just so small and such random materials that it's kind of hard to have a nice, easy stream to do that with. But definitely a big challenge in the industry, especially as disposable vapes become a bigger thing.
Right. Awesome, thank you. Well, once again, our Q&A is open. While we're waiting for some of the audience to send some questions, I'm just gonna kick it off by asking about indoor versus outdoor operations. You know, which one's more sustainable broadly? Yeah.
I'll jump in quickly. I think there's obviously pros and cons to both. I think the indoor advantage is obviously that you can control your product a little bit more. You don't have to worry about pollination or contamination from outside sources. Here in Colorado, heavy metals are a big thing around certain areas. So while that might work out well for hemp when you're not having consumable products, it's a little bit more of a health issue with cannabis. Having said that, the sun is obviously free and a lot better resource than indoor lighting. So it's hard to make an argument for that. I think greenhouses are a great option to kind of find the best of both of those worlds, but you can obviously be pretty limited by zoning and things like that in that respect.
Yeah, I mean, on the energy front, there's no comparison between indoor and outdoor cultivation. Outdoor uses almost nothing, especially compared to the incredible intensity of indoor cultivation. But beyond that, again, it's that question of what is sustainable. Like what are the various elements and how does one weigh them?
Yeah, I'll chime in here too. I mean, we work all over North America and internationally in some aspects, and I think part of it's regionally specific. You got to find the cultivation facility that's right for your geographic environment. And the other exciting thing about this industry, guys, is it's so innovative. Everything in this industry, LED lights, desiccant HVAC systems, reclaim options, cogen power, geothermal power and heat in some ways. So there's aspects of this industry that just drives innovation, and it's exciting to see all the different things that are happening on the cultivation side for these facilities.
Caitlin Urso, I'll chime in on that one as well. I just wanted to add that I think when you look at the environmental impacts of indoor versus outdoor, one of the easiest ways to think about it is for indoor, the main impacts are going to be on our secondary infrastructure. It's going to be on our power systems through electricity generation. It's going to be on our municipal water treatment supply systems. When you're in indoor cultivation, you're typically getting the municipal drinking water supply as your irrigation water, which is not common to outdoor agriculture. And then same thing, your effluent is going to our wastewater municipality. So those environmental impacts are almost secondary to our infrastructure systems versus in an outdoor cultivation, your main environmental impacts shift to land use and, water usage and then, agricultural runoff and those aspects. So it's hard to say which one is sustainable. And like all our speakers have said, it definitely depends on each unique situation, but just kind of keep that in the back of your mind of where those main impacts are going in each situation.
Thanks. And I see where we have about 9-10 minutes left here. So I want to just jump in and ask, what cannabis operations can do today or within the week or so at little to no cost that would provide the biggest impact. And maybe you can expand on that a little bit as well to a month if you think today or a week is too short of a time frame.
Impact on environmental sustainability. Yeah. Some really quick things. We're involved with a couple of technical committees with Research Innovation Institute and the CCC organization and stuff, and we're all kind of trying to find ways to collect data and optimize efficiency and sustainability. I think some of the things that have popped up are things like metering. Metering and sub-metering, I mentioned in the comments earlier, but if you're able to understand what your utility footprint is from a water or energy standpoint and justify some of the operational strategies you're putting into your cultivation facility, you can understand what the ROI is or what the environmental impact is and how you can then continue to optimize it. I don't think this industry is, a license grab anymore. I think it's more being tuned into how efficient are you running your cultivation facility and turning out a good quality product consistently. And so I revert to operational efficiency and what your footprint is as being key metrics for a lot of these facilities to sustain operations.
I'll jump in on that. A couple things. One is data. You've got to start to gather information on how your facility is operating. That could be monthly data. Even better is, some interval data. But it's really hard to figure out what direction to move if you don't even know where you are at the moment. So, some level of baselining your facility, in my opinion, something you can start on today. And is really critical to understand the facility and where your opportunities lie. There's other things. It starts to get right into the process of the individual cultivator, and so I'm always reluctant to throw out any sort of suggestions that would impact that. But why not? If you veg 24 hours, consider vegging 18 hours. Right? You just cut 25% of your annual energy use associated with veg. If you run all your flower rooms at the same time, consider staggering your flower rooms. If you run half on, half off, and then swap that photo period, you're going to cut your peak demand almost in half. And when peaker plants come on, in terms of sort of the utility side of the grid, they tend to be the dirtiest plants of all. So if we can bring down peak loads on the grid, we don't have to consider running peaker plants quite as frequently. Obviously, that requires some logistical considerations. If you currently run like one shift, how are you going to change your operations to run 2 photo periods essentially? Those are things that are close to no cost or perhaps at least low cost. There you go. There's a couple.
Yeah, and I'll just quickly reinforce the data parts. That's a good first step. You have to know where you're at to really know what your opportunities are for a lot of this. And I'll also just mention that, look around for resources out there that are free for you, essentially. Again, to brag on Colorado, we have great resources like Caitlin Urso, who you see there with CDPHE. They're always happy to talk through what's new there, what your options are, and kind of give you more information on that, especially if you're a novice, especially when I was first getting into this more in the cannabis industry. Caitlin and that work group was fantastic. So looking out there, I'm sure similar things are available in other states. If you're in Colorado, feel free to bug them on my behalf.
Yeah, so we actually do have a national network of small business providers. There's 2 of me in every state Now I'm really the only one in the nation that specifically focuses on cannabis, just because we have so many cannabis operators here in Colorado. But I have shared that knowledge with our national network of providers, and they're coming online more and more, especially in legalized states with more resources. So I encourage you guys to look into that national network. The website, I shared it in the Q&A session, but it's nationalsbeap, SBEAP.org. That's National Small Business Environmental Assistance Providers. But yes, we are free coaches.
Great. We have a question from the audience here, just asking if we see any cannabis companies making huge sustainability commitments, around setting SBTs, RE100, zero waste, I'll throw in SDGs from the UN, any of that sort of thing that you guys have seen.
I mean, from a water perspective, I've seen cultivation facilities do it out of necessity. Like in Humboldt County, they have zero liquid discharge requirements for their indoor grows, which is a massive undertaking for an indoor grow to recycle or reclaim all their water. With the option of trucking it off, which is expensive. But I'm seeing more and more facilities in newer states try some new things. I think just reclaiming condensate is a very simple process that they can implement. From a zero liquid discharge standpoint, that's quite challenging. I don't see those types of initiatives being brought on unless they're from a regulatory side.
Alrighty, it looks like we have just about 2 minutes or so here, but I did want to just ask quickly about consumer behavior and driving or inhibiting sustainability in the cannabis industry. Just your quick thoughts on that, if you have any.
I'm definitely not marketing focused. This is all kind of just my own thoughts, definitely no data necessarily behind it, but I think it's something that's evolving in the cannabis industry more, at least a little bit quicker than the general market of other industries. But I still don't think it's quite to the point where you can charge an extra 50 cents on an eighth of weed or something like that. Somebody's going to necessarily pay it. I don't know if that data is really out there yet. But I think just anecdotally, there seems to be a lot of overlap in the Venn diagrams of people that think sustainability is important and those that are cannabis consumers. Maybe that's just kind of an assumption that I don't know if there's any data to really back that out. But I think we'll continue to see that being done, but I think there's a little bit of work that has to be done by businesses to make that more clear and understandable by the consumer. I know in the plenary this morning, they were talking about certifications and things like that a little bit, and how that could be helpful, but it can also be confusing for consumers. So I think it's just a matter of kind of communicating that well. And I think once we have that to the audience and they start to digest that, I think it will be more and more impactful. But since we are such a highly regulated and highly taxed industry, being federally prohibited still, it's tough to make some of those extra investments if you don't know there's going to be a driven demand on the back end.
Awesome. Well, it looks like we're out of time, everyone. I'm not sure if you all want to just quickly type your emails into the chat so people can find it. Just if you have other questions, feel free to reach out to any of the panelists here. And yeah, I'll thank you all for the awesome conversation. I wish we had another hour, honestly, to talk about all this. And I'll pass it off to Caitlin to close us out.
Yes, again, thank you everybody for attending. Again, sustainability in the cannabis industry is of really high importance. As a new industry, we need to incorporate these concepts early on and really run with them. So I just want to tell you, we've got 3 panels coming up in the next hour, very exciting. Hemp and sustainability, one called Let's Talk Trash. I was going to say let's trash talk. The future of cannabis medicine as well. So we've got 3 really great panels coming up. you know, everyone please take a break, stretch, and then tune back in for our next panel. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks, everybody.
You guys.